Oh, hello everybody. This is Mr. Dang, and today I'll be showing you some gaming patterns that I make inside of Power Apps. But before I go into all of those patterns, I do want to talk about some of the reasons why I even make games inside Power Apps. One is I use Power Apps to make games because that's the skill set that I do have. I come from a highly Excel knowledge base. And I do want to share some of the inspirations that I have for the games that I make inside Power Apps. First, you can see that I'm wearing my t-shirt for Path of Exile. This is a game that I play in my spare time sometimes. It's one that I play with all my brothers. Let me go ahead and share my screen for a moment. And just a quick little clip. So Path of Exile, what I like about it is the fireworks. It's huge. And then let me show you the skill sets that you look at. In this game, you don't really develop, you do level up your skills, but what's more important than that is you improve yourself as an individual, is the best way I could describe it. You have little damage nodes, improve the amount of life that you have. So there's a lot of fireworks inside this game, and if you're on it, please let me know. It's a lot of fun. So that's the first game. Another one that I do want to share is one that takes me back a long time ago. Before I describe what it is, let me just show you in a game. So the way it works is, well, let me just show you the game. You have this first description, beautiful unicorn flying through the sky, and somebody else draws that. They pass on the game to somebody else who describes that picture, illegitimate child of a unicorn and Pegasus flying with fart power. And somebody else draws that. And it continues where eventually in this game of telephone, somebody injects a little bit of misunderstanding, a little bit of interference. A unicorn Pegasus flying is stabbed by a rogue wooden stake. And this is where things start to take a turn, where somebody described this as a winged dog on a stake. So it goes from a unicorn to a dog. So I love that part. Just a quick picture. This is one that I drew recently as part of a game. I got a description for Magic Cup. And so I drew a red solo cup casting spells. And somebody described it as the crying eye magic. This is the Neverwinter Nights logo of the red cup with a sparkling wand. So this is a lot of fun. It's called Interference, and you can find interference on the Windows 10 store. The makers of the game really inspired me to make apps. This is them right here, just ordinary folks who started making this game and not just made the game, but gathered feedback. They have a community site where they elicited suggestions, and they put those suggestions into the game. They are streaming tomorrow at 7 p.m. UK time, so you can check that out. So it's important to know what your inspirations are. Another one that I do want to mention from our Power Apps community is Riotta Nakamura. You might know him as the one who made the Barcode Battler game, but he doesn't just make games inside Power Apps. He actually writes blog posts on how you could do the same. So if you go to his blog post or his blog site, and the blog site of others, it's qiita.com, R, Nakamura, Martin Y. You can see some of the blog posts that he's made on game development, specifically for Power Apps. So you can check that out. One more thing. Of course, my inspirations come from Japanese RPGs, JRPGs, games like Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore, a whole bunch of those. So I never really had a formal education in making games. I simply just, having played so many of them, you start to figure out some common patterns, and you think of how you might make it for yourself. So those are just some of my inspirations. I will now go into some of the gaming patterns that I do inside Power Apps. One of the gaming patterns that I recently showed was this game of a knight kind of character who is able to move across the screen. And I have some tiles on the screen, and then I have the sprite in the center. It's an isometric grid, and right now it's not a complete grid. It's a work in progress. I haven't put in the other characters, including a wizard, a goblin, and a skeleton yet, but eventually those will all come into play. So let's go into what I do about the art. Later I'll be showing you what I do about the audio. Those are the two main categories. Because I'm not, I don't know how to draw this kind of content, I support the local community on itch. Itch.io is where I get all of my artwork. Every single thing that I use is from this community. So let me just show you some of the content that I have. In my library, I have purchased the knight cartoons, the goblin cartoons, the wizard, the skeleton. I'll show that in a moment. I have a set of icons. I have a set of fonts that are 8-bit. I have some parallax art that you should check out, and I'll describe some of that later. And some pixel icons. One of my favorites is this set of 1,996, I think, images that are used for all kinds of things. So to show you the knight that I will be using in this in the app, it can be found from Federico on itch, Federico 4D. It's made up of 1,386, I believe, 386 pictures with, maybe I'll just pull it up. There are 6 different styles, 3 of which I use inside the app. I have the 64-bit pixel design. I have a design that has what's called flat line art, a flat art with a stroke around it, and then the final shaded kind. But because I like 8-bit art, I use the 64-bit or the 64 pixel size. Each one of those styles has different actions that the knight does, whether it's blocking. Maybe it's better if I show the line one. Doing a blow, dying, hitting, or being hit, being idle, jumping, running, thrusting, and walking. But not just each of those actions, but 8 different directions, starting with down, down and to the right, all the way to the other direction. It's important to know the 8 directions that I have because it'll make more sense when I show the diagram later. So with those pictures, I create the character. Instead of just showing you how I got to this final state of a smooth animation, let me show you where I actually started. And then I'll show you not just where I started, but how I advanced that character over time. You can see at the top here, things didn't always start off smoothly. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I set up that character. So the way this single image works is it looks at this gallery of all the frames. There are 8 total frames. So that's the gallery of sprites. It takes the nth number, in this case, whatever this variable is, and it takes the last one in that subset. So first n will get this number of frames, and then I take the last one of those frames. So I'm essentially incrementing the frame that I'm looking at. And then I take the image control in that gallery, and then its image property, which is the image itself. So I'm getting the nth picture here. A timer control has a duration of the total time of the action. Maybe I'll pull up whiteboard for this. So I have the entire duration of the action. And then another timer repeats n number of times where n is the actual frame it's on. So if I had 8 frames, this is frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The repeating timer will count, and then it'll repeat, and then it'll pass, it'll repeat. Each time that it ends, I'm going to add 1 to the selected frame. So it starts at frame 1. A selected frame adds 1 to itself, become frame 2 when the timer ends, all the way until it repeats an 8th time, and it completes its animation cycle. So it goes to the last image in that frame. So that's the first method. The problem is when it's selecting a picture from that gallery, there is a moment where it flickers. And so this method was not very reliable. But before I got to this final stage of the smooth image, I used what I knew from Photoshop to create a GIF image. So I think it's a good time to teach you not just a little bit of Power Apps, but how you would actually create a GIF. Oops. Let me close that. So this is a quick tutorial on how to make a GIF. Let me pull up the night images. Okay. Let's do the down direction. Pull in one picture into Photoshop. And let me make it big so that you can see the actual pictures. 1 second. Let me just check something real fast. So what I'm going to do with this is, what I'm going to do with this image is I'm going to create a timeline. Let me close this tab group for now. If you're not familiar with timeline, the way that you would get to it is you go to Window and you go to Timeline. Now you're capable of creating almost a video sequence. I'm going to create a timeline from this image. It starts off by making the timeline 5 seconds long. I only want it 1 second long. Each second is made up of 30 frames. Let's go ahead and add the other images. I select and drag them onto the canvas. Now by default, Photoshop will ask me to resize it. I'm just going to click the Enter button or commit it with the check mark. Do all of them. I have the entire sequence in the Photoshop canvas. Now I'm going to edit the timeline so that each one of them is really small. Okay. Just going to drag each of those frames. Okay. Now I will zoom in. I'm going to make a few mistakes here on purpose as I do this. So at the very beginning, I decide maybe I want each of these frames to show for maybe 2 frames. Actually, let's do 4 frames. Well, I have eight of these pictures. If I want it to take 4 frames each, 8 times 4 is 32. So I'm going to have this frame end at 32. So that's 30 frames plus 2 more. I'm going to have the next one at 28 and at each multiple of 4. 20, 16, 12, 8, and 4. So I start by sticking them where they would end up for the 4 frame duration. Then I go back and figure out their start location. Okay. Now I have all the frames in place at 4 frames per second each. One thing to know about the timeline is by default, the resolution is at 50% playback, and it's not looped. So just to give you an example of how bad that looks, if I click the play button, it's all mushy. That's not really helpful for me. I think they reduce it to 50% for the performance of your device, but we're okay with 100% and looping. So if I click play, I can see how it actually would look. And you can see if I do it at 4 frames for each of those frames, or 4 frames long for each of those frames, it's kind of slow. I think I want it faster than that. So I'll bring it to maybe 3 frames each. 3 times 8 is 24, so this should end at 24. And I'm going to move each of them to where they would end up. 21, 18, 15, 12, 9, 6, and then 3. So again, I start by determining where they would end up, and then I do the start time. So this is how you would make a GIF. Now I'm going to play that. Still very slow. Let me just show you some more. Yeah, still kind of slow. Now I could reduce it to 2, but what you will come across with is if I had to do this for every single direction, I have 8 of these directions. If I had to do that for all of those directions, it's a ton of work. I don't have time to do, I don't have time to do that because I would have to save this one by one. So I need a more scalable solution for that. That's why I do the animation inside Power Apps itself, inside the location where I do the game. One more thing. To save this, I go to File, Export. I use Alt-Shift-Control-S normally to get to this. Let me zoom in. So I would normally save it this method. I select GIF as the type with transparency. That's important. Most of these settings are default. Now I could make it larger or smaller. And if I were to double it, 200% large, make sure that the quality is on nearest neighbor because I'm working with pixel art. If I use bicubic, it's going to shave off each of these pixels, so it won't be scaled correctly. So when working with pixels, increase its size or shrink it by nearest neighbor. And then I click Save as a GIF. Again, I don't have the time to do that for every single direction. That's why I do it in Power Apps. So going back to Power Apps, the way I got the image animated is first I have a table of the different frames. So for an attack frame, the blow, I have 8 of those frames, and I have the images 45 through 52. That's 45 to 52. So I filter that table where the movement is this type, walking type, whatever's selected here. Now I go in there and I insert 2 sliders. The first slider determines what position is this particular frame. Is it the first position? Is it the second? Is it the 8th one? I do some magic here. This is not a calculation I really like to do. Okay, so what I do is I get that exact same table. So here I have the exact same filter as the items of the gallery overall. The reason why I do that is I concatenate it. If this given frame, the ID number of the given frame is the same as the one in this table, so the table of all of them, make it 1, otherwise make it 0. So for instance, I'm looking at this subset. For that first picture, it's going to return 1 because it's the first one. But for the other ones, it's going to return 0. For the second picture, it's going to return that same table, but it's going to match that second number, 46, and the rest are 0. And it's going to return that, just to make it a point, it's going to return that same table, but it'll match the third one, and it'll return a 0. It's important to know that I'm returning a string that has this set of characters. Now, from that string, I find the number 1. Now, when I use the find function, it's going to tell me the position of that 1. It works the same way in Excel as it would in Power Apps. So let me just show you what this looks like. Find 1 in this thing will return its position. As you'll expect, it'll return 2 because the 1 is in the second position. It'll return 3 when the 1 is in the third position, and so on. So the slider is holding this number. What frame is it? The reason why I have to do that is this picture itself, it doesn't know that this is the first frame. It doesn't know that. It doesn't have that information. There's a few other ways I could do this as well. But that's one of the methods. Now I take that number, and let's see. That's what this slider is currently set to, its current value. The maximum value is the total number of frames, so it's going to show 8 here. The other slider is used for determining when do I show that picture. Jumping back to whiteboard here, I know how long to show that picture because I calculated it. So if I know the total duration of the action, I purposely made each of these frames 100 milliseconds long. So I know the total duration is going to be 100 times 8, 800 milliseconds long. The first frame is going to be shown from time 0 to time 100. The second frame goes from time 100 to time 200 milliseconds. The third frame goes from frame 200 milliseconds to 300, all the way to 700 milliseconds to 800 milliseconds. So the second slider is showing that range. What would be the minimum time I would show the frame, and what would be the maximum time when I would show that frame? So then I go into this sprite, which is really not an image picture, or not an image control. It's really a gallery control. And then inside that gallery, I have that image control. So the gallery is going to show all of these pictures, gallery sprites. It's going to show all of those. The image control, I'm not using the visible property. I always show the pictures on purpose. If I change the visible property, there's a possibility that the image will flicker. Instead, I keep the image shown all the time, but I change its transparency. So here's my condition. Starting from the inside, if this given picture has its slider value equal to 1, in other words, if it's the first frame in the image, make it so that the, well, let's start at this level. If this is true, show it with no opacity. Otherwise, make it 100% opaque, in other words, transparent. Inside that, there's 2 times when I want to see the picture completely. One is when the total time is less, when the time in this timer is bigger than the minimum, less than the maximum, show this picture. In other words, when it's between time 0 and time 100, show the picture for the first frame. When it's between time 200 and 300, for the third frame, show the picture. And then there's one edge case, which I show here. When it's the very first frame, it's okay if it's at time 0. That's the only edge case that I have. Just to make it a point, I use greater than for the minimum time, but less than I use the equal sign for the maximum time. So when the timer has reached the maximum time, I make that okay. So at some point, I have to include 0, right? That's why I have to make this equal. I have to allow time 0 to be okay for that first frame. It's just one of those edge cases that I had to make an additional condition for. So that's how I create this image. So if you want to try this out, I do encourage you to purchase this picture, or just purchase any of these pictures. Support these artists. They're so affordable. I mean, to get 1,300 frames for $10, that's very cheap. So download it and try it for yourself. I'll send out a copy of this so that you can insert the image yourself with the URL yourself. I stick these images on Azure Blob Storage, by the way, and then I just reference this URL relative to my Azure Blob Storage location. So that's one place that I use. Jumping back to the game, let me show some other things inside this. So 3 of the things that I set up to show the picture, I show the 3 different styles of the 6 that I care about. I use an ad hoc table where I list out the different styles. This is the name of the folder that I have on Blob Storage. These are the dimensions of that image. And this is the percentage size of how I want the character, or how I want the size of these tiles in the background to be relative to the character. So for the pixel character, I want the tiles to be 25% of the character. For the prettier pictures, the flatline one and the shaded one, I want it to be 1/10. And then finally, the last column that I have is feet. This is where what percent of how far down from the actual image dimensions do the feet appear? Well, the feet appear at 60% of this picture and 70% of the other pictures. That becomes important when I'm trying to determine where the character is actually standing. So the character is, the center of the character is generally at this red dot right here. It's really hard to see that red dot, so I'll zoom in. That's where the character is actually standing. And I use that for some of the calculations inside the app. Okay, And then I have another combo box that just shows the different actions that the character does. Blocking, blowing, dying, hitting, being hit, and so on. The third combo box is the one that I use for the styles of the art in the back. If I were to change this to fighting, it'll change the art in the background. Okay, so that's some of the artwork that I have for the main character. I don't just want to talk about the main character, though. Let's take a look at the artwork for the tiles. Now, the way that, let's see, the artwork for the tiles, I have a table of the different types here. Now, this is a table that shows these are the different types in Pokemon. Normal type, flying type, fighting type, poison, ground, bug, and so on. So I have an artist who created images for each of those different types. I have the name of the image that I have stored on blob storage. I have what probability do I want this image to appear? Do I want it to be selected? For instance, if I go to, let's choose grass. If I choose grass, some of these images I want to appear more often than others. For instance, I might not want as many stumps, so I want its probability lower. Other images I want more probable, so I have a wider range of probability. So that's how I break it down. Now I create a grid, an isometric grid. Let me show this on whiteboard first, and then I'll go into some of the math. An isometric grid is one that has 2 dimensions. Well, it looks like 3 dimensions, but it's really 2 because everything's at the same z of 1, so it doesn't really have that 3rd dimension useful. So it has an x and a y. The x dimension and the y. By default, I don't really know the locations of each of these tiles. I don't know where they might be. So I have a table of whole numbers, 1 through 1,000. I use this table of whole numbers to create an isometric grid of different sizes. Sometimes I don't want my grid to be too big. Maybe I want my grid to be 6 of those tiles by 6. Sometimes I want an isometric grid that's 23 tiles by 23 tiles. This is the one I'm currently using now, 23 by 23. I want to scale my solution so I can make grids of any size. That's why I use the table of whole numbers, 1 through 1,000. I can make tables of any size under 1,000. So how do I do that math? How do I know where the tile number 1 should go? How do I know where tile number 29 should go? Let's take a look. So for tile 1, I do some math. Let's say I want 23 in a row. I want, actually, let's do just a simple number, 10 in a row. I want tile 1 to be at that top corner, 2, 3, all the way up to 10. And then I want the 11th frame to go to that next row. This is x equals 1, x equals 2, x equals 3, all the way to x equals 10. This is y equals 1, y equals 2, y equals 3, and so on. It'll continue to count 11, 12, 13, all the way up to 20. And then it'll go to 21, all the way up to 91 at the 10th row. So at the bottom corner, I'll have that 10 by 10 grid. So somehow I need to tell Power Apps that I want that first number to be at location 1, 1. I want that 12th one to be at location 2, 2. I don't want to steal the opportunity for you to do the math. So I'm not going to go over too much of it. I think it's a fun math problem to do. I do have a blank instance of this app that I can share with you without the artwork. And then you can insert your own artwork. But I'll leave some of the math up to you to figure out. What I will show here, just for the sake of time, is I'll show that because I don't know the location all the time, depending on the number of tiles that I want, I have to calculate it. So some of the calculations that you will go over, and these are available in the blank app that I have, is you will come up with an X column. You'll come up with the Y property of what it will be. And then on top of that, you have to determine, now that you know the X and the Y, where X would be and where Y would be, where would actually be, how many pixels would it actually be moved? So then you have to do some additional math. I'm not going to go over it too much here. And then how far would it be from the top? So how far would it be from the left? How far would it be from the top? I take those numbers and I position them inside an HTML box. At the top, I determine the size of the container itself. What is the size of the whole thing? What would it actually be? So I set it to the size of the actual HTML text box. And then from that, I create divisions. And I repeat these divisions. So here's my table that I created earlier with the X, the Y, the top, and the left. I repeat a divider that contains an image. So I have that random image. I make it the width of a sample tile that I have on the screen. And then here's just some extra information. I provide a black border if the character is right on top of it. So I place the tile and its image and potentially a black border for each of those locations. Okay. And so that's how I set up the tiles. The reason why I don't do this in a gallery is a gallery will essentially have a control for every single one of these pictures. And that's a lot of things on the screen. I mean, a gallery is one thing, but it essentially repeating those things all across the app. So having just an HTML text box is just one control on the screen. So it's much more efficient, much more, much faster. Okay, I'm going to quickly go over the position of this image box, I move this image box relative to the character on the screen. So the character is not, the character is actually stationary. I know that sounds weird, even though it looks like it's moving, but its image box is always in the center of the screen. So this first part of this formula is, it starts at the x property of the character, and then I take the midpoint. What's the difference between the character's width and the width of this entire image background image? It's pretty much the midpoint formula. This is a common pattern that you should know to center things on the screen. You start at the location of one of them, and then you find out what the difference is between the two widths. Okay, now from that, I subtract the amount that it has been offset in the x direction. As the character is moving, as it's moving, that repeating timer that changes the frame is not just changing the frame, but it's offsetting the amount that the character walks. I believe it's this timer. So every time this timer ends for the different frames, it will take the existing amount that it's walked. It'll add an increment. Here I decided I want the character to move 7 pixels each time the timer ends. It'll multiply that by the amount. If I'm running, I want to multiply the amount that is moved, that is displaced, by 1.5. If it's jumping, I also want the character to be moved 1.5 times normal. Otherwise, keep it that amount. And then I also want to add a bonus amount. If it's going in certain directions, 1 through 8, I want it to move in the x direction. So directions 1 through 8, not all of them are in both up, down, left, and right. It's not in all of those directions. So it's not always going to move in the x direction. When it's not moving in the x direction, I multiplied the direction by -1, which is essentially not moving. Or it's moving down or to the right. I'm sorry, it's moving left in the x direction when it's -1, and it's moving in the positive x direction in certain directions. And then the same calculation is done for the y direction. I multiply a bonus for running and jumping, and then I multiply again if it's not moving in the positive y direction, or if it's moving in the negative y direction. Okay. Now, one final pattern. Let's see this in action. The timers are going to be moving. It's a little hard to see the sprite, but I'm going to be moving the sprite. So you see that this timer repeats, and it's a little slow right now because I'm live streaming. You'll see that the timer repeats multiple times. It's a little hard to see because it's going so fast. So this timer repeats the number of frames until it completes this entire 900 millisecond cycle. So that's how I make that character move, and how I make the background move relative to the character, some of the artwork that I use. In the remaining time, let me go over how I use, there's actually sound inside this app. There's some music. So where do I get my music? I get it from a free source. if you go to youtube.com/audio library/music, you can use some different sounds, and each one has a different attribution, a different license. For this particular one, I wanted some epic music, so I searched for the word epic, and it returned, you see it quickly returns different songs. You can play them to preview it, and depending on the song, like this one, you could use it for free. This one you could use free for any of your videos. So if you're on YouTube, you might want to use these. It doesn't matter if you're doing a game or just a YouTube tutorial. You could use these songs. Some of these sounds, let me choose one that has a different attribution. Some of the songs you do need to copy paste this message into your video or whatever you're creating. It's an easy copy paste job. By the way, Kevin MacLeod, one of my favorite sound makers on this audio library. So you'll like these sounds a lot. You could download it and stick it directly into your app or upload it to blob storage and reference it. Inside this app, I included the audio track as a file, and I tied it to the media control. Here's an audio control. Over on the right-hand side, I always have it playing. So it's on auto start. It's looping the whole time. It starts at time 0 when it repeats itself. And I don't have it auto pause. So that's where I get my audio. I have a lot of other things that I could show, but that's for another time. So just an overview of the things that I went over today. I went over some of my inspirations, where I get my pictures, different blog posts that I use. I showed you where I get my audio, how I do my frames. I'll go ahead and use some of the time now to take some questions. Nabin has a comment. The GIF is so smooth and cool. Yeah, creating a GIF inside Photoshop is really smooth. And then creating the animation inside Power Apps, yeah, the bottom one is very, very smooth. Geeta has the same comment. Yes, the animation for this, getting it to a point where it could be that smooth. And really, it's what's amazing about this animation is not just that it's smooth, but that I could change it to any of the other ones seamlessly. So I have this. This is essentially a GIF box. Comments from Vivek. This is the 4th live. Yeah, this is the 4th live hangout we've had on YouTube this week with the Power Apps community. Make sure you join the Power Addicts every time that they hold it. They post it on Twitter. You could see them chat about and geek out about different things in Power Apps. So that's the Power Addicts. And then Vivek also had Power and Naps on Wednesdays. This week he had Keith. You can check him out on his channel. And that's all I have for today. So I want to thank you guys again for coming out. This is a great way of spending the weekend for me, just showing you some of the things I make. I want to encourage people to just spur of the moment live stream when you just want to share something. Just make it casual. Just show something that you're proud of. Show something that somebody else might benefit from. And then show where you get your things. Like for me, my inspirations, where I get my artwork. Share that with others. Okay, so I will go ahead and end the live stream now. Thanks for joining me.